Good evening. My name is Joseph Gerson. It's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Campaign for Peace, Disarmament, and Common Security and our co-sponsoring organizations, the Labor Network for Sustainability, Mayday Strong, ZNet.org, Indivisible Maynard Area, and Massachusetts Peace Action. I also need to thank Mariana Fernandez, who's anchoring our Zoom technology. For years, many of us have talked about and worked to break movement silos and to truly engage in intersectional organizing, bringing together peace, justice, labor, climate, and other movements. Necessity being the mother of invention, resisting Trump's tyranny may be the force that actually brings us together. It's no secret that Donald Trump and his accomplices are conducting a creeping coup to destroy 250 years of constitutional democracy. They are attempting to seize all the powers of government and to concentrate them in Trump's personal will. In addition to the brutal treatment and deportation of innocent immigrants, it's the ICE Border Patrol invasions of our cities and the $40 billion plan to create a U.S. gulag of concentration camps, not necessarily limited to immigrants, that keeps me awake at night. Trump and his mandarins and allies are working to vastly increase their power and privileges at the expense of constitutional and liberal democracy and our basic well-being. They're disregarding the law and human decency, assaulting truth, creating climates of fear, attacking immigrants, racial minorities and political opponents, and sexual minorities. They're deploying the military to our cities, declaring false emergencies, intimidating universities and the press, and creating a pathetic personality cult. And friends, we are all living in that picture. And this past week, the man who said that we wouldn't need future elections doubled down on his threats, moving to disenfranchise many voters and saying that he wants, very unconstitutionally, to nationalize the election. He is desperate because even Steve Bannon is warning that if Trump Republicans lose November's election, they will all go to jail. Popular opposition is growing, and a powerful movement is based on. A powerful movement is resisting. But a worst-case scenario is certainly in the realms of possibility. How can we overcome the increasingly fascist rule led by a man who says that his only limits are his moral considerations? This from a man who has demonstrated that he has no moral considerations. Our nation, however flawed, was conceived on the basis of popular, which is to say people's sovereignty, not monarchical or techno-fascist rule. If Trump and company move to prevent or completely rig the 2006 or 2008 elections, or in some other desperate situation, how do we protect the vote and the foundations of a democratic society? A general or social strike that brings society and economy to a halt is one way that we can nonviolently manifest people's power. Most recently, we saw the power of such a strike in Minneapolis, and history is full of successful strikes that have toppled illegitimate governments and won economic and social justice, as well as ending wars. I should be clear that with this evening's webinar, we are not yet calling for a general strike. In recent months, at marches, standouts, and demonstrations, and in Minneapolis, we've been hearing calls for a general strike, but few know what that would entail, including its risks. But we should be listening to Stacey Abrams, who advises that we first need to lay the groundwork and build our capacity should we find ourselves needing to do a social strike. And even relatively conservative Senator Gallego has advised that a general strike may prove to be necessary. So with this evening's webinar, we are rolling up our sleeves and preparing the ground. Before introducing this evening's exceptional speakers, a couple of words about our format and process. We will begin with Colleen Rowley's report from Minneapolis, the epicenter of the Trump MAGA assaults and of popular, nonviolent, and popular resistance. Jeremy Brecker will then give us a lesson about the history, dynamics, risks, timing, and possibilities of what he terms social strikes. And Jackson Potter will then take us into perspectives of organized labor, the force which over the generations have conceived and led general strikes. After their talks, we'll turn to a question and answer period. To post a question, please enter it in the Q&A button at the bottom and center of your screen. My friend and CPDCS board member, Terry Rockefeller, who some will remember from her roles in producing the Eyes on the Prize series, and who helped to found September 11th Families for Peaceful Tomorrows, will help me identify and pose your questions. Please do not clutter the Q&A space with comments, as that will make it difficult to see the most important questions. So with that, let me introduce our wise and courageous speakers. Colleen Rowley comes to us from Minneapolis. She was an FBI special agent and whistleblower who is best known for testifying about the FBI ignoring information about what was a suspected terrorist attack on 9/11. And that led to a 2-year investigation by the Department of Justice. She was a Democratic Farm Labor Party candidate for Congress in 2006, and she is a member of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. Jeremy Brecker is a historian, author, and co-founder of Labor Network for Sustainability. He has been active in peace, labor, environmental, and other social movements for more than half a century. He's such an old man. He has written more than 15 books on labor and social movements, including Strike, Common Preservation in a Time of Mutual Destruction. And he recently published the report, Social Strikes. Can general strikes, mass strikes, and people power uprisings provide a last defense against MAGA tyranny? And our third speaker will be Jackson Potter. He has served as the Chicago Teachers Union Vice President since 2022. He became an educator, with social studies being his first love, so that he could find ways to ensure that Black and Brown Chicago public school students received equitable access, maximum opportunity, and dedication from their teachers. He serves on several American Federation of Teachers committees and is a Chicago Federation of Labor delegate. Under Jackson's leadership, CTU helped inaugurate the National May Day Strong Coalition. Last fall, May Day Strong organized more than 1,000 events in all 50 cities, bringing together the largest, strongest, and most militant Labor Day events in a generation. So with that, let's begin. And Colleen, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks for having me. And should be a very interesting discussion. I live about 17 to 20 miles south of the Twin Cities, but even the 7-county suburb area has been greatly affected by what's gone on in Minneapolis and St. Paul. There's good and bad news after nearly 2 months of what they called Metro Surge. The good news is a few days ago, I think 4 or 5 days ago, border czar Tom Homan, who was sent to replace the more Nazi impersonating former head here, Bovino was his name, who would dress himself up in complete military gear with chemical grenades hanging. He would relish throwing grenades at crowds, and real tough guy looking. He was essentially fired now it's about 2.5 weeks ago, and they realized the need for perception management. So they sent in this grandpa looking Tom Homan in a kind of a rumpled suit, an elderly man. And he made a lot of promises. He met with Governor Walz and Attorney General Ellison 4 days ago, again, about 2 weeks on the job here. He actually announced, but he announced in a vague way, that there would be a significant reduction of ICE. He also in the meantime, Kristi Noem, the head of Department of Homeland Security, said that they would order the ICE in Minnesota. I don't know that this applies nationwide, but she did say that they would order them to wear body cameras, which is the rule and the standard for all law enforcement in Minnesota, to wear body cameras. And there was talk, I'm not quite sure where this stands, about wearing identification and not using unmarked cars as if they're grabbing people off the streets. So those things were kind of acquiesced in here. But the Democrats now, those are 3 of the Democrats' requirements, or their list. They have 10 that they want these reforms, or what do they call it? There's a word for it, guardrails guardrails. So it's been toned back to be said it's the 10 guardrails to keep ICE and Border Patrol from unlawfulness that they're engaging in. Okay, so that's where it kind of stands. There's a lot of unknown. So far, maybe a few hundred have left. There were 3,000, but certainly not all 3,000 have left. And when you look into it, here's the downside. Here's the bad news. The bad news is nationwide, they took 10,000 ICE before Trump and increased it nearly overnight with little training, 47 days of training, through ads that recruited what you would call, they almost aimed for people that had more thuggish backgrounds in military, war zones, etc. And they increased it from 10,000 to 23,000 overnight. And that's just ICE alone. The other component is Border Patrol. Border Patrol was already at 20,000. So when you add those two numbers together, and when I've been giving some interviews, I've been saying, you understand there's at least 43,000 and they can't be fired. So once, they have job security, and they're not going to put them into a knitting club at this point. So Trump is not giving up. Those 43,000 are going to be surging all over the country. And Joseph just kind of mentioned this. They're creating warehouses that can tents that they can put 10,000 people in at one time. They're even talking about having incinerators for biohazard waste in these places. There's a lot of troubling things. So that's the bad news. The warning has to go out from Minnesota to the rest of the country, because Minnesota now has suffered under this for a good month and a half and actually a little longer. So what I wanted to mention is it's not the solution, but we're talking about a strike being a solution. I think that what has to happen is people have to study what the people in Minnesota did to resist this, because it really was quite the model, and it was a lot of things. Yes, there were some big marches. Now, with the calling for the strike, what happened here is because people were so afraid to go out. They were even afraid to go to restaurants. The employees were afraid to go work in restaurants because ICE would wait outside the restaurant and do this indiscriminate profiling thing. There was no targeting at all involved. They would just wait outside for the restaurant to close, and then they would ask people for their ID. And, people don't carry it. So the bottom line is the closing down of business in Minneapolis and St. Paul was mostly out of fear, different types of fear. And the governor now, they've done a study that over $200 million in business losses have occurred here. And these were small businesses like restaurants. So the downside of calling for business to close, and again, they didn't really have to do this here in Minnesota because they already closed up. Not only did the businesses close up, but education. I know Jackson is going to talk about education. The children were afraid to go to school. So they immediately made a concession that they could study from home. And many schools were down. Their pupil numbers went way down. They will then tend to possibly lose government funding because their student numbers went down. So even though even if it all ended, even if Holman was telling the truth about that this will end, he essentially implied that it was over in Minnesota. I don't think that there's any evidence of that yet. But even if it was true and it started to end in Minnesota and they would be gearing up in other places around the country, it's going to be a long time before the damage is repaired here. The damage was significant, not to mention the trauma. Now, I'm just going to say with what should be resistance, Minnesota organized on many levels, and people tended to organize around their neighborhood community. and we're, organize, organize, organize. That's always the mantra. They organized food to be taken into people who were afraid to come out of their house. People have been afraid to come out of their houses for, over a month. They even organized people to help with laundry for people who are afraid to come out of their house. Not to mention, exercising their lawful right to go tape record with their cameras, and Holman accuses Minnesota of being agitators. And we called ourselves Minnesota nice. So a far cry from agitators, but people have that right. And they have a responsibility if someone, and we've recognized that after the George Floyd murder, that people have a responsibility, because if a violation occurs, and it's certainly a murder, you have to be able to have witnesses to this. So it's the latest. This is the latest really bad update. I just heard it a little bit ago on the news. When they murdered, when ICE and Border Patrol, by the way, Border Patrol, it's not ICE. ICE was not the shooters of Alex Pretty. It was Border Patrol. The guy who shot Renee Good also was Border Patrol, but then he had switched to ICE. So, and actually Border Patrol is worse. They are supposed to be within 100 miles. They're supposed to be working in 100 miles of the borders, Canada and Mexico, but they're not. They've been set into the cities now. And so when when the Alex Pretty shooting occurred, when Renee Good shooting occurred first, the authorities said, no, Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. The state will not investigate. States are the experts. The law enforcement, state law enforcement, are the ones who always investigate law enforcement shootings. They're the ones with the expertise. They stopped them from even going in and investigating. Then with Alex Pretty, the same thing. They made a line. They would not even let the forensic BCA in. So then after Holman came, there was talk that the FBI had relented, and they would be sharing their investigation of these two murders with the BCA. Just tonight, they have announced, and I'm going to say something this is an intelligent guess. I think the orders have come down from FBI Director Kash Patel, who got his orders from Bondi, who got her orders from Trump. And what these orders are is do not allow any investigation. So now we've heard this flip-flop that the FBI will not allow our state law enforcement to investigate a murder by law enforcement. It's absolutely incredible. There's been
Colleen, it's my unhappy responsibility to tell you that your time is about up.
All right, so maybe someone will ask me a question, but I want to talk about legal resistance through the use of law. And as I was just getting to, one of the ways that you can use the law is for state authorities who have jurisdiction and who are the experts on lawful law enforcement. You have to get them on your side, and they have to then be strong and oppose the unlawfulness. And there's many ways of doing this, but I'll stop.
Colleen, thank you. And just to appreciate, your deep convictions and what you've given to us over now more than a few years. So thank you very much. So I'm now going to give the floor to Jeremy Brecker. And Jeremy, take it away.
So thanks so much for that, Colleen. I first want to just mention that looking through the list, I have so many friends here from so many places and so many different times in my life. And I'd like to underline what Colleen said, that if we want to figure out what to do about the threat to democracy and the threat to our elections, that the first thing that all of us have to do is study what people have been doing in Minneapolis, because it is a historic example of popular resistance to authoritarianism, and a brilliant example of what I have been referring to as social strikes. Social strikes is a term I've been using to include many forms of mass action that use the withdrawal of cooperation and disruption to affect government and social structures. It's a term that includes general strikes, political strikes, and mass popular people power uprisings. And it's in all its many manifestations here and around the world, it really is based on Gandhi's aphorism that even the most powerful cannot rule without the cooperation of the ruled. And that's what the people of Minneapolis have shown us. And that's what I'm going to talk about today are various ways in which that fundamental power of the people has been used as a way of countering authoritarian attempts to destroy democracy. The Minneapolis day of refusal to workshop or go to school involved a wide range of activities that could be done by different kinds of people. It involved work stoppages. It included other forms of non-cooperation and forms of disruption by very diverse groups, including 100 ministers who blocked the airport, which was being used to deport people on behalf of ICE. What the anti-ICE protests, and not only in Minneapolis, but in the many other cities, Chicago, Los Angeles, and you can go through the list, have accomplished is not only blocking concrete actions by the forces of oppression, which is crucially important, but they have also painted two portraits. One is a portrait of ICE and MAGA as the embodiment of brutality, oppression, of rubbishing of law, of destruction of the Constitution, and a threat to the rights and well-being of ordinary people. And a second portrait of the movement and of ordinary people who are embodying peace, caring, neighborliness, and courage, and showing that they and people like them are protectors of ordinary people, protectors of our rights, protectors of our well-being. And the impact of the anti-ICE activities, most recently Minneapolis, but all over the country, has been a huge impact on the public mind, a huge shift of opinion on ICE, on the behavior of the Trump administration, and in fact, on the issue of immigration itself, where public opinion has shifted from being very supportive of Trump's deportation and terrorizing activities to a strong shift away from them, criticism of them, and even much more positive attitudes about immigration and immigrants themselves. And the impact has also reached the political system, most obviously with the Democrats, who, after giving, for the most part, almost a blank check, other than some speeches, to the Trump administration for all of the depredations it's visited on the American people and the people of the world, has now suddenly found, at least for the moment, its backbone and is standing up and refusing to support the legislation for funding ICE and the Department of Homeland Security. Whether this is going to last, whether they'll stay with it, that largely depends on whether the people, and I'm sure many of them are right here in this group, continue to put the pressure on them that force them to take that stand in the first place. But it's also even visible in the Republican Party, where there are just many signs that Republicans are scared to death for their political lives from the massive shifts against Trump's policies in the public mind, which are widely showing up we could just say, for example, the landslide election of Mamdani, but in other early elections all around the country, and they are petrified of what that's going to mean for the upcoming November elections. So this whole set of activities is part of something that I refer to as social self-defense. That's the defense of society by society against the totalitarian, authoritarian, fascist attacks that are being made on every aspect of our society and what it is that makes it possible for us to live together in our society. That social self-defense has many, many aspects. It includes electoral action. It includes institutional action, for example, by the still a minority, but significant minority of lawyers and law firms and health organizations, medical organizations, universities that have stood up to Trump and his minions. And it includes cultural opposition and inspiration. And I don't think I need to say anything more about that except the two words, bad bunny. But at the core of that social self-defense has been developed what I call the movement-based opposition, which is very much an expression of what Joseph Gerson said at the beginning of this, of people coming out of their silos and forming a common alliance to stand up to Trump and MAGA, and not only stand up, but begin to take on the functions of an opposition party, not running candidates, not running in elections, but recruiting people, providing leadership, defining issues, and doing that in the streets and in civil society. And that movement-based opposition is one of the most important developments in the first year of the Trump tyranny, and it essentially includes the anti-ICE actions, on the street actions, as well as including the massive up to 7 million participant national demonstrations, including the May Day strong demonstrations and the No Kings demonstrations. And I think there's good reason to think that the upcoming March 28th No Kings mobilizations will be even larger and have even more impact. But now we have to ask the question that this forum is organized around and that Joseph raised at the beginning. What if all those efforts are insufficient and we have a Trump regime that attempts to perpetuate itself in spite of all that by stealing the upcoming election and then eventually stealing the next presidential election? So what can we do? The first thing I want to say about this is that there's a very little known reality that the 2020 coup attempt by Donald Trump and his minions was actually defeated by an alliance of social movements. This is not well known because it was kept kind of quiet, but after the election, there was a long, brilliant investigative article in Time magazine called The Secret History of the Shadow Campaign That Saved the 2020 Election. And there was a democracy defense coalition that was formed with more than 200 groups. They ranged from the AFL-CIO to Black Lives Matter. They were not publicized, not well known, even in retrospect. But they undertook a wide series of actions. First of all, to protect the polls. Just for example, in many places, the polls were surrounded by when the MAGA people threatened to come and interfere with the voting process. Thousands of people turned out at selected polling places and nonviolently protected them and basically turned the polling process, the voting process, into a street celebration outside the polls as people had to wait these long periods of time in order to vote. And then after the election, there were a variety of actions that were designed to protect the count. And again, there was a great threat of MAGA interruption of the counting of the votes. And under the slogan, count every vote, various of those attempts at state legislatures and elsewhere were blocked. And they were ready as the results were being announced for mass action at 400 locations around the country, and which would surely have been the beginning of a national social strike. But in this case, the electoral process held, the voting process held, and instead they turned it into a celebration of the election that weekend. So that's something right here, not well known, but one piece of what we need to think about and showing that we can affect the electoral process if they try to steal the vote. But the most dramatic cases are international. I'm just going to mention the ones that were specifically social strikes to protect elections. In some ways, the most dramatic of them all was when Ferdinand Marcos, the dictator, and it was what they're now calling competitive authoritarianism. You still hold elections, but there's no chance of anyone beating the dictator. And that was exactly the situation with Ferdinand Marcos in the Philippines. Corazon Aquino ran a campaign which had overwhelming popular support, but the election was stolen by Marcos, and Aquino and her supporters launched what came to be known then and has been known ever since as a people power campaign. And it took a couple of weeks. At the end of it, there were millions of people thronging the streets in the Philippines. And eventually the military, which had orders to fire on the people, split from their bases and went to bivouac in a place that was being protected by the people from the Marcos regime. And eventually Marcos was flown out of the country and Aquino inaugurated. Serbia, very similar process, took even longer. Milenkovic was opposed by, I believe it was 17 totally fractured political parties. Even though he was unpopular, there was no chance of defeating him in the polls until the movement organization that was campaigning against him pulled all of the opposition groups together, made them choose a single candidate for each position, and had a unified campaign against Milosevic. He similarly called out the army. They had orders to shoot, but hundreds of thousands of people arrived at the capital, including miners and other workers, and just a very huge cross-section of the society. And eventually he gave up and was flown out of the country. But the most recent and the one that's most relevant to us was in 2024 when President Yoon Suk Yeol of South Korea declared martial law and sent the army to surround the parliament. And what happened next was described in a statement by the Korean Confederation of Trade Unions. Our citizens, armed with nothing but conviction, rushed to parliament and stood against the martial law troops. Through sheer determination, they broke through the blockade, enabling parliament to lift the martial law. Once again, it was our citizens who protected democracy. And as they did this, 200,000 people marched outside the parliament, which finally impeached Yoon.
Jeremy, you've got a
So,
couple more minutes, so you kind of focus your
okay.
remarks.
So, fortunately, we're getting to how we prepare for social strike now. But let me just add, because some of you may be thinking about the problem of how do we get accountability, the very question that Colleen raised, and the Yoon was very recently sentenced to 5 years in prison, and he is facing a death sentence for the crime of insurrection this week. Okay, so as far as using social strike here, the many people have been calling for it, talking about it. As Joseph said, Senator Galegio has called for a national strike. Don't show up. He said, we grind this country to a halt. But we can't call for it now, and we know why, because strike conditions, as a wonderful study of the 1919 general strike, the steel strike said 100 years ago, strike conditions are conditions of mind. It can't be imposed by a plan. It can't happen just because there's a call. But there is a great deal we can do, and this is what I'm going to end with, to prepare for it. And this is something every one of us can do in our own communities. First of all, and it comes from studying what's been done in other cities, and especially Minneapolis. So first of all, start mass training. Minneapolis had many trainings. Thousands of people were trained in resisting ICE, and there's many places that's available. You can easily find out. Indivisible is running mass trainings, but so are Mayday is running mass trainings. So are many other groups. Secondly, rapid response networks. Thousands and thousands of people in Minneapolis joined rapid response networks that were coordinated through signal chats and similar social media means. And that's why thousands and thousands of people converged on ICE agents with blowing their whistles and taking their pictures of the crimes that the ICE agents were committing. And that's something that we can organize. It's happening in many cities, and it's something that's a central aspect of what the social self-defense that's going on now is doing. Another thing from Minneapolis that Colleen raised up was mutual aid. And again, that's something that we can be doing everywhere as a way of protecting immigrants and protecting the other people who are the targets of the authoritarian attacks. Another crucial point is, and the Minneapolis brought this out very strongly and has been emphasizing other people to do it, and that's the attack on the corporations that have played the backbone of support for Trump authoritarianism and MAGA. The Tesla takedown was the most dramatic and incredibly successful initial version. Target has been a major target in Minneapolis, and there are Home Depot and many other corporations that the Minneapolis folks and Mayday Strong and others are urging us to take on in every community around the country. Finally, I think we need to pay attention to the need to broaden the constituencies and broaden the issues that are being drawn in to social self-defense and into the movement-based opposition to MAGA and Trump. Um, there are plenty of people who would believe in democracy and don't want to see it destroyed, but they got on their mind they have to have kitchen table issues. What's being talked about now is affordability, healthcare, housing, the cost of food. These are things that many times that 7 million who have participated in the biggest demonstration so far have as pressing issues that they're facing every day. And to the extent that our movement, the social self-defense and the movement-based opposition can make those issues be front and center and help people organize around those issues. Don't leave it to the politicians. Don't wait for the politicians. Don't wait for the next election to address it. We can address those in the streets and in the supermarkets the same way that we have the other issues like ICE. And that's the way that we can bring in a vastly larger proportion of the population. Those problems are caused by the authoritarianism. They're not a separate issue. They are a result of the tariffs and the taxes and all the other things that the Trump administration is doing. And we need to bring those front and center in what we bring forward as why people should be in the streets challenging the Trump administration and the MAGA authoritarians. So the good news here is those are the things we need to do today as part of, someone said, building up our muscle. Those are the things we need to do to restrain and push back on the Trump administration and MAGA power today. Those are the same things we need to do in order to build the muscle that we need for the kinds of social strikes that will allow us to ultimately push these people off the stage of history.
Jeremy, thank you so much for that comprehensive and inspiring talk. Just two things before I introduce or give the floor to Jackson Potter. Simply to say that this webinar was not organized for entertainment, right? I want to encourage people when we have done the recording to share it with your friends to inspire them and give them some of the foundations that we need. The other thing, it's Alexandra Shaner has put into the chat. Work ahead of you. Join up with community members, coworkers, and friends in mutual aid, training, and various forms of social self-defense near you. This is a powerful resource, and you can list your organization and find organizations. You'll find the link there in the chat. With that, let me turn the floor over to Jackson Potter, who's done really quite remarkable work in Chicago and beyond. Thank you for joining us, Jackson.
Thank you, Joseph. Great to be with you here tonight. I want to just kind of start where Jeremy left us off. The calls for a general strike, they come out of a great tradition of freedom fighters, workers, communities withholding their labor to make this country, force this nation to live up to its ideals. Maybe perhaps the greatest example is the general strike of slaves during the Civil War that broke the back of the Confederacy and led to the eradication of slavery and the greatest expansion of political and economic rights in the nation's history. You can think of the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, the creation of the first public schools, Department of Justice, our DEI programs that help address white supremacy and the disparities and inequities in the society as a result of that heroic effort. And I think about my own town, Chicago, 1886, when workers in Haymarket and beyond went on periodic and sustained strikes despite horrendous state violence and repression and even the execution of labor leaders without evidence in order to win an 8-hour day for all workers. And that feels like the tradition we're in with the Minneapolis day of no work, no shopping, no school. What a lot of strikes haven't been, and I'm a little nervous to say because Jeremy obviously is steeped in the history much more extensively than myself, but contrary to the romanticization, these strikes have often not been across all states and all industries, not even close. And often in a U.S. context, they happen in key choke points of the economy. Think of railroad workers in 1877, steel in 1919, trucking, Minneapolis 1934, auto, the great Flint sit-down strike. Maybe the closest thing we've seen to an actual general strike in the way in which people think and imagine is 1946, when federal price controls were lifted and we saw the greatest expression of strike activity in the nation's history. So we have this incredible power within us, whether we're in a union, in a community organization. Jeremy is popularizing this notion of social strikes like the Montgomery bus boycott. And all of those efforts and initiatives require structure tests, organizing conversations with our coworkers on our blocks, in this current moment, in rapid response networks, our neighbors. So in Chicago, to heed this call, we're going to ask our mayor and our first elected school board to work with us on a May 1st day of no work, no shopping, no school. And in May Day Strong, we want to nationalize what Minneapolis just pulled off because we need it now more than ever as a structure test to ward off the attacks on workers' rights by this billionaire authoritarian government. And in case anybody's got any illusions, this is the wealthiest cabinet in human history. The most billionaires appointed to positions of power that we've seen in a government since the nation's inception. So we got to get organized. And I think we need a no shopping, no work, no school demand for May 1st across all of our cities, townships, and villages. We think it'll be the biggest May Day potentially in U.S. history because, when they start arresting black journalists indiscriminately, terrorizing 5-year-olds, when they raid secure election facilities in Georgia to disenfranchise black voters, when they kill Americans for exercising First Amendment rights, citizens and non-citizens alike, because we just choose to disagree with the regime's tyranny. How low do we have to go before we say enough's enough? May 1st will be our opportunity to get ready and stay ready, get our weight up, see what we might have to do if they try to impose martial law or invalidate the November elections, as Jeremy stated, or when they arrest more labor leaders, or when they inflict more war crimes on countries across the planet, or attempt to dismantle public education and the remnants of public accommodation that so many people sacrificed for during that Civil War while Trump and his cronies attempt to establish a new confederacy. We can't let that happen. So we've got to build to see each other in the streets. I put Mayday Strong's website in the chat. Please check that out later this week. You'll be able to populate your own events, and we're going to start building stronger, bigger, broader movements to resist and win and actually live up to the morals and values that we contend, should be the American dream. We've got a long way to go, but we're not ready to settle for what has brought us here to the brink of authoritarianism. We've got to be much more strident and clear about our vision for the future. In 2019, when CTU went on strike, we had that vision. Mm-hmm. That's how we got sanctuary school language. People don't often hear the story. It was an 11-day strike that won protections for our undocumented students. It was, a strike action that was able to win social workers and nurses in schools for the first time in the history of Chicago public schools. So there are practical considerations too for workers everywhere, union, non-union alike, in getting ready for Trump Part 2 to win more together than we could ever win apart. We established in Chicago that these agents of terror cannot enter a school without judicial warrants. But we saw in Minneapolis now they don't even care about warrants. So we've got to adapt and evolve as well. These rapid response networks have been incredible. I, heard of a 600-person training just last weekend in Chicago. There's a real outpouring of sentiment and ability to build new networks of resistance. And that Minneapolis has shown us how to do it. They came out of a solidarity school with Mayday Strong in October with clear ideas around what red lines, if crossed, would necessitate them taking this collective action we saw on January 23rd. So, when folks in Minneapolis hear you tell them, oh, what can we do to help? I hope they don't take that as symbolic sympathy, but start to tell us, organize your own protest at a Target and fill up that, front area, buy, the salt and turn it back in, gum up the works, make them pay a price for their cooperation with fascists. Airport actions, can we do that nationwide on May 1st? Do we need to set up barricades and support what they're doing to more clearly, carefully, and comprehensively monitor ICE activity and stop them, slow them down? Organize a May Day mobilization in your own city. That's what I think most of our siblings would ask of us. They've shown us a path. It requires clarity around what are the red lines, what we won't tolerate, creativity on how we come together on a work day. It's the last work day on May 1st, over the next 3 years. And it comes on a Friday. Workers, come on, we shouldn't even be working on Fridays. We need a 4-day work week minimally. So, let's do some mass trainings. Let's take, like the St. Paul Federation of Educators took mental health days to close schools, and they brought families together to do art and then participate in the big march. Let's, like SEIU Local 26 did with their employers in the private sector, set up some management agreements. If corporations want our business, then they damn well better support our resistance. Take some field trips, sick days, 0 days. The options are endless. They've shown us the path. Jeremy's history has shown us how we can do it. Let's take all of the advice possible and the examples and put them to use. Thank you.
Jackson, thank you. Thank you so much. My hope is that people will catch your spirit through this cyberspace. And, as you were talking, I was reminded of Bob Moses, who was one of the leaders of SNCC. He was once asked, what should we do? And his response was, well, who is we? And, I think what I need to say is we is each person here and all the people you know. I was negligent in not urging people to post questions in the Q&A box. I see that they're beginning to come in. And I'm going to ask Terry Rockefeller, if she's been able to look at these more quickly than I, if she can.
I think there are several questions that were in the chat, but I think one of the issues is that people would like to return to Colleen and just ask, how do we get accountability for the crimes that ICE and Border Patrol have committed? And I think people wanted to hear you speak further on that.
Well, as a whistleblower, multi-whistleblower, I think the appeal to conscience is key. And what the experience in Minnesota was when even the U.S. Attorney's Office, even people up in Department of Justice in the civil rights, and even one FBI supervisor that everyone would have considered establishment. These were the careerists. They had invested their life. The chief of the civil division had 17 years in Harvard. And if you saw Seymour Hersh's article, which is an excellent article, describing the breakdown of law in Minnesota, a complete breakdown where you have an immigration attorney, herself from an immigrant family, and the judge is berating the poor attorney who was just admitted temporarily to the bar in Minnesota, berating because They have failed to follow 70 some, maybe 100 court orders here in the past month. This has never happened before. So again, you're seeing this real mess that happened with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Then first 6 or 7 walk out, including the top career prosecutors, and then another 6 or 7 walk out. The former top acting U.S. attorney is now Don Lemon's defense attorney. So not only walked out because of the job, but has flipped over. Again, the reason is, and I'm going to try to make this argument over and over, when even you join the Bar Association, and certainly the FBI and military and these other things, the first thing you do is you swear to uphold the Constitution and the rule of law. And when you see these illegal orders from headquarters, not just the U.S. attorney, the judges themselves now, there's actually an immense controversy in the judicial branch. When our legislative and our executive branches go off the rails, there is one remaining. It might only be a glimmer of hope. A lot of people, I've argued with them because they've given up on the courts. They say, oh no, the courts, they're part of it, the problem, whatever. Literally, the way it's set up is the only potential check on that power. And again, it would apply to any issue, but it certainly applies to murder. It certainly applies to what the acting U.S. attorney was told: cover up the murders and go after the victims. Now, can you imagine having invested your life in the enforcement of law, and then you'll be flipped on its head, totally flipped on its head? And so I think there's hope in that. And I don't think sometimes accountability takes a while. If you ever listen to those cold case murder cases, sometimes it's 20, 30, 40 years later. But I think that one of the things that the new areas that are going to be looking at ICE and Border Patrol surging. By the way, Texas is one of the main states. They're building like 9 new immigrant warehouses in Texas. And so what I think people in those areas should be doing, they should be calling for immigration attorneys. Get your people that know this stuff, and because you're going to be swamped with hundreds of American citizens, and now you need to get your media on your side. In Minnesota, it took at least 2 weeks for even our local media to come around. The first week they were saying, the Border Patrol says this, the other people say that. They were just giving their completely, he said, she said objective thing, which they claim is objective. After a couple weeks, guess what? The media has finally saw the light. And the judges many judges, I don't care what judge or what president appointed them, they are also understanding this. So I think there's a glimmer of hope. And you got to get the attorneys, you got to get your constitutional law attorneys and your immigration attorneys on board, because they're going to have so much work that they, and maybe they have to work overtime, but you got to get more of those people. And I think that's one of the answers to this.
Colleen, just thank you for that. I'm reminded of an old slogan: when the people lead, the leaders will follow. I want to go to a question here that I know Jeremy addressed in his report, and maybe Mariana, you can put the link to the report back in. Art Duncan asked, with the general strike, how do we adequately protect those who have the most to lose from a shutdown and walkout? For example, service workers, small business owners, etc. Yep. Will a general strike disproportionately impact the poor, often people most likely terrorized by this administration? How do we prevent or at least mitigate that impact?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is what the people in Minneapolis have so vividly shown, which is the kind of mutual aid that provides direct assistance and help. If we're talking about people who are need food, shelter, and other forms of medical care and other immediate forms of aid, we need to organize that ourselves. And what's been proven not only in Minneapolis, but a lot of other places, is that we can do that. And we need any general strike needs to be prepared to do that, or social strike. Uh, there are wonderful historical examples um, of general strikes, the most vivid being the the Seattle general strike of 1919, where the unions actually organized all the necessary services. They kept the power going, they kept the hospitals going, they developed food service for the population at striking restaurant workers, put together food feeding centers and so on. That's another piece of it. Um, as far as uh, um, people who I think a big piece of the problem that is being addressed here, and it's a very serious problem, has to do with retaliation, both legal retaliation and employer retaliation. And in fact, one of the reasons the unions are reluctant to participate in general strikes and social strikes by actually authorizing their members to strike is because they're afraid of the kinds of retaliation, including decertification and even large suits and fines that are levied against unions when they uh, participate in strikes that are outlawed in their contracts. Um, I don't think there's a simple solution to that problem other than the same kind of massive resistance. If they start firing people, you have to strike. And that's since illegitimate firing is one of the main things that triggers strikes. Um, I think that kind of response on our part has to be one part of protecting anybody who engages in what's basically striking for the common good. I'm sure Jackson has more things to add.
Jackson?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say like the South Koreans, when you talk to them about, their 2024 general strike that brought down martial law. And by the way, when that president attempted to impose martial law, the first arrest warrant was the head of the General Trade Union movement. So we shouldn't fool ourselves to believe that these authoritarian, Christian nationalists are going to somehow put on kid gloves when they consolidate more power. They're going to go after all of us in even more brutal and fascistic manner. So part of our best defense is a good offense, and I think we need to talk about it just like that with people. It's how people in Minneapolis. I know Kim is in the chat asking about what is the specific way in which they organize in Minneapolis. Well, they've been talking about contract alignment for a long time. They've been talking about a shared legislative agenda. They've been moving trainings to cross-pollinate across private and public sector unions, as well as clergy and community orgs for years. So we're going to have to accelerate that, in this moment to the extent possible. I think it's why we're doing solidarity schools across the country to put people in the same room that haven't really coordinated and built campaign and coalition previously. Because if we don't do it now, we're in big trouble. And I think we're seeing a call in response to that. I would just say that there's been a lot of informal strikes that are, hugely successful where people don't have any rights under the law to do anything. Look at West Virginia and the 55 counties that went on strike, and the Red for Ed movement in 2018, and Arizona and Kentucky, Colorado, Oklahoma. These are right to work states where they've, completely obliterated formal union rights. So the fact that workers can do that is in some ways a testament to there isn't regulation in the same ways because the rights have been eliminated. So now we have no choice but to figure out new and creative ways to get our needs met.
So just before turning to Terry for the next question, Just want to say that I think we all take our spiritual strength from different ways, and for me, reading history is there. So among other things people might do to get ready, is to read about the Montgomery bus strike. Um, there's a new book by Alan Ruther about his father, who was one of the leaders of the sit-down strikes that really won the union rights in the automotive area. It's a brilliant description of those sit-down strikes, and I'd encourage people to take a look at that. Terry, what have you got?
I think there are a number of questions, and I'm going to try to combine them that have to do with what is the roles that we're seeing from labor at this moment. What are national labor movement leaders saying about ICE and Border Patrol violations? What are they saying about threats to the 2026 midterms and the future elections? And what can we be doing now to be actually building that larger base, drawing in more people? Jackson, you wrote some very helpful things in the Q&A, but you might want to talk about the slogans that you're using that are clearly really designed to broaden the base, as Jeremy said we needed to do.
Yeah, I mean, I might briefly say,
wide open, and Colleen, you as well, if there are things that happen in Minneapolis. So take it away.
Yeah, I think, we need an affordability agenda. We're hearing that over and over again. It's poll tested. It's clear from Mamdani's victory. It's obvious in terms of so many Americans that live paycheck to paycheck. So we better answer that call if we want to build something that's viable in response to this authoritarian terror we're seeing in our streets. So part of that is childcare for all, fund schools, not bombs, or more, healthcare for all efforts. And then we've got to tax the billionaires. The Trump administration gave the greatest tax break that took money from the bottom and gave it to the top in U.S. history. We better put light a fire under our governors to tax these big tech companies and the wealthy who have made a killing in this moment to fund the things we need and deserve. So Mayday Strong, we're definitely helping people with that kind of legislation at the state level, but we're also pursuing it as sort of general demands at the national level on May Day and beyond.
Okay, so a question here from Joe Berry, which I think for Jeremy. In terms of the impact on the economy, what is the difference between a general and a social strike? And what happened in the lockdown under COVID? Obviously, that came from the top in most cases, but still, what can we learn from this precedent?
Just to talk for a second about the language of general strikes and social strikes. Historically, a general strike has been a strike by a group of unions in different industries. And the main ones in the United States have been in one city, and they have almost all been sympathy strikes to support a group of workers who are being locked out or otherwise abused. Social strike is a much wider term. It includes general strikes, and social strikes often include social strikes often include general strikes, as the case of the Korean example that Jackson was talking about. But they really involve the mobilization of a whole society to fight against, in this case, authoritarian rule and the destruction of democracy and the stealing of elections. So that's the core of the one is a much broader term because we have only about 10% of American workers in unions, and unions are so hamstrung in their ability to participate in even strikes in their own industries, let alone strikes for broader causes. The likelihood is that the kind of mass mobilization that will be able to have a significant impact on MAGA and Trump and their power is likely not to be a limited classic general strike called by the handful of unions that are willing to participate in such a thing, but much more likely to be a broad social movement like what we saw in Minnesota, in which unions play a very, very important role, but not it's as part of a broader comprehensive movement. Um, and the mm, it's a little hard to make a comparison to the COVID shutdowns, except to say that just shutting down a significant part of the economy had big impacts. Interestingly, a big impact was a great improvement in air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. Uh, but I don't think we want to shut down the economy through a general strike. In order to achieve those, there are better and more effective ways to achieve them.
Barry?
I think there are a number of questions that really are interested in this broader May Day activity and how it can work effectively with local officials, and especially to focus on the issue of protecting our elections.
Yeah, I mean, I see Dennis in the chat. He's a tremendous leader in our union at the Chicago Teachers Union. And I think we do have to start considering what is our election defense strategy. We know, I think, Jeremy, you mentioned Serbia, that there were poll counting efforts established by the pro-democracy movement in order to protect the results. We probably have to figure out something along those lines. Um, Efforts like we saw in Minneapolis to counter the ICE terror by creating more mutual aid networks, delivering food to students and families that were unable to leave because of the saturation of efforts, to kidnap people. What are the corollaries in terms of election defense that we may have to develop and innovate around? And then, the South Koreans will tell you also that they call a lot of things general strikes. It's not, a really precise term. And so I really appreciate Jeremy's interventions around a social strike because I think we need to be flexible and not lock ourselves into one version of these things, but really tap into as much of our kind of diverse movement tactics and methods as possible in order to win more.
If I could just follow that up, Joseph,
Please.
because in the chat, there had been a great deal of interest in what Jeremy had described about protecting the 2020 elections and the collective effort that went into that. And there were questions about whether or not something similar happened in 2024, but also interest in preparing now for something to protect the midterms. I don't know if you have more to offer about that, Jeremy.
Um, the First of all, absolutely, and I think that's a demand for protecting the elections is something very important for us to start adding in our Mayday Strong and No Kings and all of the local efforts that are in alignment with them. Um, and haven't, I actually haven't seen very much discussion of that yet. I've been thinking that if Steve Bannon and co are going to say we should send ICE in to protect the elections, that maybe we should start doing actions at polling places now that are essentially demonstrations that people are prepared to come out and protect the vote when the time comes. Just something to think about. I don't have an elaborated plan for that, but that seems like a good kind of building up the muscle warm up activity and a way to call attention. Most important, a way to call attention to the threats against the elections and the vote that are being made. Um, the story of the uh, 2020 election defense is fascinating. And I saw that someone put in the chat the wonderful Time article about that effort. And as far as thinking about what are some of how would you do it and what do we need to do now, I would say take a look at that article and see what they did in 2020. We're in a different situation. They weren't sending armed thugs around and threatening to send them to the polling places and similar things that Trump is doing now. But as far as the nuts and bolts of how do you organize an election defense, I think that the experience from 2020 that's in that Time magazine piece is well worth paying attention to.
So I'm going to jump in here with kind of two historical references and then a question that's up here. One is I had the rare privilege of working with people in Europe who had been in the nonviolent resistance to Nazi occupations. It took remarkable courage. And I think we need to talk about the need to be courageous in this time, as people in Minneapolis were. Another kind of nugget from history in terms of where a strike has succeeded. I think a number of people here will have participated in the moratorium strikes in 1969 against the Vietnam War, right? 200,000 people came to Washington, and Nixon said, well, he wasn't going to pay attention. He was just going to watch a football game. In fact, he had U.S. forces on a high nuclear alert for almost 29 days at that point. And in his memoirs, we can read that when he learned that 200,000 people had come to Washington, he knew he couldn't follow through on his nuclear attack. So just to appreciate, another victory that we've won. There's a question here from Moji Aga, who I expect is in part writing out of his experience of the massacres in Tehran and across Iran. He asked, to what extent has shock and awe assault on democratic institutions caused collective trauma? And I would add, if so, how do we break trauma?
Yeah, that's a great question because people are actually quite easily manipulated. Fear is one. It's not the only emotional vulnerability of a population, a mass population, but it's a very important one. And it's always used as the Nazi Goring. There's an article I just read about Goring having told the psychiatrist who interviewed him at Nuremberg, oh, it's easy you can get anyone to do terrible things. You can get anyone to go to war. You just tell them they're being attacked. And, this was Trump's propaganda campaign promise. He basically told the American people that you're being attacked by illegal immigrants who are committing violent crimes against you. It's a big lie because they did not even target violent criminals. They went in indiscriminate raids of all kinds of people in the Twin Cities. It was not targeted at all. And that is where a lot of people said, oh my, he lied to us. It is not about targeting somebody's a murderer or a rapist. No, it's getting my neighbor next door who's been working hard for 20 years. So that alone is a key thing that people will see through those lies. But it takes a long time. And in the meantime, fear, hate, greed, false pride, and blind loyalty are the 5 main emotional vulnerabilities of the human situation that are constantly used. And the fear can make people become helpless. go back to what Joseph said about the, trying to resist Nazism back in, I mean, a horrible, scary thing to do. But as WikiLeaks said, courage is contagious. And that is truly evident in Minnesota, because when you see your neighbors and you see even Alex Pretty holding up his phone, trying to tape record and then being struck down and beat up. I mean, it does give people a certain amount of courage and the bravery itself. So everyone has to be an example. The 14, literally, I know people are not impressed by this, but 14 career prosecutors, nearly half the office, walking out when they're given an illegal order. And it took immense courage. They all have mortgages. They all have trying to get their kids in college, etc. And that's a huge amount of courage. It should be celebrated. A lot of people make it into us versus them, but what you have to do is appeal to conscience and to defeat these, fear being one, but the other thing is pride. People are so proud of themselves, and this is a huge manipulator of people. So anyway, I give lectures on social psychology, you might tell. And and I like the question because it's something that you have to overcome. It's a predisposition of the human race to have these groupthink and be manipulated by emotional, not facts. And everybody says, oh, you don't listen to the facts, because emotions are what really work on people.
Terry, do we have time maybe for one more question here?
Yeah, there were a couple of questions that dealt with addressing the corporate supporters of MAGA and Trump. And also, this was from Michael Eisner asking us to remember that the United Farm Workers great boycott took a long time, but it did eventually have an impact. There were also earlier questions about how to include Citizens United into organizing efforts when we really seriously think about protecting our elections from corporate power. Again, it was wide open to any of the speakers and anyone who knows what's going on or has visions.
I mean, I think this gets to what Colleen was saying, that resistance is infectious, and certainly it seemed like the Trump blitzkrieg was going to be endless and we wouldn't be able to slow it down initially. But that's been counter to what's happened. We've seen, the No Kings marches, record numbers. We've seen Tesla takedown efforts that Jeremy mentioned lead to Elon Musk getting out of Dodge, no pun intended. And then, or Doge, right? And then we've got what happened with Disney, backing off and not, canceling talk show hosts who criticize the regime. And then more recently, Target is seeing record drop in their profitability because of their anti-DI policies, their, support for MAGA, their willingness to allow Bovino and his Gestapo to come through stores and tackle employees. So people aren't having it. I'm seeing a great level of fight back, and I think the stakes are high, and there's a greater recognition and raised consciousness around it. And I think, we're really capable of fighting back in new, strong, mobilized ways. So we've got, March 28th, we've got May Day, we've got Labor Day. I think we got to take full advantage of each of those intervals and then be ready for a curveball.
So as we wrap up, before thanking our speakers, just want to add the dimension of humor. And humor makes things both contagious, and it also subjects those who are oppressing us to ridicule. So I'm just thinking about, with Target, the number of people who've gone in and bought de-icers and then gone to the returns counter and asked for their money back. It brings smiles to people's faces, and in these days we need smiles. I also want to suggest that one way forward. I mean, we're looking at the big events in March, but there are events happening just about every day, standouts and protests all over the country every day. People can think to take posters with them that call for the need to take the various actions that were outlined here. The need to feed our neighbors, to go into create mutual security, use that, both the posters and the speeches, as a way to kind of build for the future. There was a question about how many people were on this webinar. I think we were about 150, but the resources here, we'll be sending it out to the recording out to all 497 people who registered, and we trust that when you get your copy of the recording link, that you'll share it with others. Finally, I want to just thank our speakers. I mean, I think it's been a remarkable webinar, very educational and inspiring. No way to thank you enough. I guess the best way to thank our speakers is to go out and organize. Just to also thank Terry for her role and Mariana as well. Thank you so much. And quoting Joe Hill, don't mourn, organize.